Yeah, we're live. 10:17. We're doing a little early morning one. I wasn't on the last two nights, so I wanted to try to catch up. Last night was date night, so we got to do date night. Way more important than car stuff. But today instead of tonight, I want to talk about the results from the video that I posted yesterday, and that was on what happens when the guys from Brian Tooley Racing installed 5.3 LT heads on an LS, and why you may or may not want to do that. And the reason that I did that video is because Brian and I talked about this years ago, and we thought, it would be a really good idea. You could get junkyard 5.3s, and there's lots of L83s and junkyard L83s, and then you could put the L83s for a guy that didn't want, for instance, for a guy that didn't want to run, to go through all the trouble of doing a DI motor and doing a drive-by-wire throttle body and all that. That you could take because a stock L83 LT head is way better than a 706 or 862 head. So it's better than a 799 head. Those heads will make more power. So if you could take that head and put it on an LS, that would be cool, right? Well, yes and no. It does flow more. It does have a smaller chamber, but there are a lot more things that have to go into making that cylinder head work than just swapping a head. Like, it's not just, okay, we'll take a 706 head off and put a 799 head on, or put a trick flow head or an airflow research or that kind of cylinder head on there and just do a simple head swap. It's way more involved than that. And that's why way back, like, after discussing all the things that was required, and we can go through a quick list here to see what things are required. So when you can do the head, you have to change the dowels, but that's not a big deal. You got to put the head on. You got to plug the DI, because the DI, the injection, is in the cylinder head. You have to have an intake manifold. You have to have the LT intake manifold, because if you run an LT head, it has to have a matching LT intake manifold. It also has to have the LT rockers and different push rod lengths than an LS. It also has to have the LT headers on it, so it has to have an LT, and then you also have to have a custom camshaft. You have to have a camshaft because the valve locations are different in the LT head than they are in the LS head. So the load positions are different. It's a custom cam, so you have to have a custom cam that combines the valve positions and then the front drive that we'd use to put it in an LS motor, which is different than an LT. So it is a custom cam. And so you're going to have to make all of that work. So it's not just a simple head swap. It's a lot more involved than that. And after we started talking about that, I'm just thinking, well, I think that it's way more than most people would go through to actually make that swap work for whatever benefit it was, because you're getting rid of some of the benefit anyway. Some of the benefit of if we compare an LS motor, a Gen 3 or Gen 4 LS motor, to an LT motor, the LT motor makes more power. Part of the reason that it does that is because it has direct injection. And and I remember having an argument with somebody telling them, hey, look, port injection is definitely going to make more power. Port injection provides charge cooling. And as a general statement, that's probably accurate. But Brian's done some testing on the direct injection, and it did indeed make more power. So I stand corrected there. Port injection does not always make more power than direct injection. And so that's part of it. You have higher compression on the L83 if you're just, and so my thinking was, in this combination, it's cool because it's a neat gee whiz thing, and taking the later things and putting it on the early things, it's kind of a fun video. But I think, honestly, in doing this video, that I'm probably going to talk more people out of doing it than I would talk people into doing it. And the people that would be talked into doing it would be doing it because it's, something neat and different and new. And then people could look in there and go, what motor is that? Is it an LT? Well, no, it doesn't have direct injection. Is it an LS? No, because it's got LT heads on it. So what is it? It's some kind of cool hybrid, which in and of itself, doing things different, is obviously very cool. But the question that I got more often than not on this combination, a couple of them. One, how did you do the fuel system on this? So this is essentially just a port injected LS motor. It does have LT heads on it, but the direct injection, where the direct injection nozzles go, that was just simply plugged. That's pretty easy to do. We ran both, and they ran both an L86 for this test, and compared an L86 and then the long runner and the short runner version of the Trinity intake manifold. Now, the Trinity intake manifold is already set up for port injection, so it will use port injection. The L86 manifold, which I mistakenly showed the LT2 manifold, which I also want to get the data on how well the LT2 manifold does versus the LT1 manifold and the L86 manifold. But the L86 manifold that we compared to the Trinity manifold was modified to accept port injection. So that this was basically just for all intents and purposes, this was just a port injected LS as far as the computer knew. So we were directing fuel or injecting fuel, at the intersection of where the manifold, because the injectors were in the manifold and the cylinder head. So that was fairly simple. It was running as a port injected manifold, no high pressure stuff, just your normal 60 pounds of fuel pressure. So that was pretty simple. All of these tests are run on E85 just because they run all their tests on E85. It's less expensive and it's easy for them to get because they have it locally. So that all worked out fairly well, and it made pretty good power. But the next question, because they put a good cam in it and put a good intake manifold on it, and made over 500 horsepower, which is a good amount for a 5.3 liter. The question becomes, can we make 500 horsepower just by keeping the LS and LS and not going to a hybrid? And the answer is yes, we can. And so in this next video, we're going to do a comparison between that motor, the hybrid, LS LT hybrid, and just a modified LS with, heads, cam, and intake manifold, and we'll demonstrate that. And then we'll talk about what it took to get there. So that will be the next video. Then I think what would be good, and I don't think Brian has run that test yet, is let's find out how much power we can make from an L83. So let's put valve notches in it so we can run camshaft in it. Let's do a ported L83 head, because rather than just run a stock one, which is not a fair comparison if we have a ported head on something else, let's run a ported, maybe a milled L83 head, and run that on there and run port injection, maybe run VVT if the camshaft will allow that. A lot of times these bigger cams, they either restrict the VVT, they put limiters in them, or just eliminators. They just lock it in place and just run it as it can. So some of these bigger cams may just be locked in place anyway. But if they're not, then VVT would be a good option. But let's see what that combination would make, because I want to do a video in addition to these. I want to demonstrate, because for a lot of guys, especially the LS3 guys, are like, oh, this was the last hurrah of the LS world, and there were LTs, and the LS guys, the LS3 guys are saying, oh, our LS3 is better than the LT1, or it's every bit as good, and it's not. So we want to show what was done, because they did step-by-step stuff on an LT motor, an LT1, to make really big power. And I think the power is beyond what I've seen anybody make on a natural progression of an LS3, at least the 6.2. So it should be interesting stuff. So I got a lot of good videos coming up. I got some more small block Ford stuff coming up. I've got the oiling system mods on a small block Ford, which is good because a lot of guys forget about that stuff. We all concentrate, because that Richard guy does videos on, heads and cam and intake manifold and nitrous and blowers and turbos and all the stuff that we get. Hey, we got big gains from this, but we forget about some of the other things where we can look and find at least small amounts of power gains. And in this case, some fairly reasonable amounts of power gains from modifying the oiling system, which is something I'm going to do on the 2.2 Dodge too, because it doesn't have the oil pan that I want, or doesn't have a windage tray. It doesn't have a lot of things that I'd like to see there that I think would definitely make it better. So let's talk about what you guys got going on, and see if you guys have any questions on the LS LT hybrid, and why I think very few people are probably going to do that. I want to see a true 7-liter LS with an actual 427 bore diameter. Well, the videos that I just posted on the 427 were a true LS7. They were a 4125 bore and a 4-inch stroke. In fact, that not only were they a true LS7, it was actually an LS7 short block. So it actually was an LS7. So it was a 4125 with a 4-inch stroke, and not, because I don't ever recommend that people do a 427 any other way. I don't recommend that they do a 427 like with a 4100 stroke or a 41250 stroke. Certainly not on anything with a stock sleeve length. So if you take your block and you sleeve it, then you can run bigger strokes. We've run 250 strokes and that kind of stuff where you have longer sleeve length and you're not going to draw the piston out of the bottom of the hole and cause piston rocking and instability and ring seal issues. So I don't ever recommend that. I don't recommend guys on stock sleeve lengths going to more than a 4-inch stroke. And so I also don't recommend taking a 6-liter block or an LS 1, 2, or 3 aluminum block and trying to go out to 4125. You just can't do that without sleeving it. So it's probably not a good idea. So all those 427 tests that we did with Brian Tooley, that was actually an LS7 motor. An LS7 short block that we ran LS3 heads on, but we also ran LS7 heads on for a couple of the tests. So you guys can take a look at all that stuff. Green Base, you're doing subwoofer stuff. That's awesome. I just got back from took the puppies up in the hill, the puppies and Milo up on the hill so they could conquer the trails. Green Base, yeah, there were nice long runners on the long runner version of that Trinity intake manifold, even though that was the long runner version of the Trinity intake manifold, because relatively speaking, those are longer than the 4-inch or whatever shorter runners that they normally use on those. They were, as we showed in the L86 versus the long runner version, they're still quite a bit shorter. Those would be more like tunnel ram or high ram kind of runner length, although they would act as longer runners if they aren't actually longer runners, which they might be a little bit. But even if they're not, even if they were the same length, these would act as longer runners because of the way that they did the entry on these things compared to the way that Holly did them. So let's see what we can do. 7 thumbs up. Nice. If only one person can give 7 thumbs up, then we wouldn't have 55 people here and 18 people with thumbs up, because are there really that many people that don't like what we're seeing? Makes me want to do a swap on my 2008 LY5. And then the other thing that I wanted to do is if we're doing a LS LT hybrid, and we're also doing your typical 5.3 LS upgrade, then we also need to do obviously an L83 upgrade, which we talked about. What if we did ported heads and all that stuff? And then we would cover all 3 bases at least of the 5.3 thing. What did you plug the injector ports with? They make plugs for them. I don't think that they use, there are actually plugs made to plug the DI holes. Wooden dowel push rods, oval springs. Would you rebuild a 5.3 motor with 230,000 miles on it? You can, but mine has 330,000 miles on it. And a lot of the motors that we run, certainly all of the ones that were big bang motors, we didn't rebuild them. We just ran them. And when we run them, even with that many miles on them, they work really well. The one thing that I would look at is if you're going to take it apart, especially if you're going to run a turbo or something on it, we take them apart and put ring gap in them anyways. And when you do, the thing that I would look at is, I would look at 2 things. One is look at the rocker arms and look at the wear on the cups of the rocker arms. And then a trunnion upgrade might not be a bad idea. And also look at the lifter trays. If the lifter moves around a lot in the tray, and in fact, if it's got 230,000 miles on it, just replace the lifter trays. Those are cheap and they'll stop the lifter from rotating and causing all sorts of like catastrophes. Other than that, we just put them back together. We use the original bearings. We use the original rings. We put ring gap in them. When we take it apart, I'll put a new head gasket on, because you could reuse the old one. Matt over at Sloppy does that. I don't like doing that, because when you take them apart and separate them from the head, especially if that's the original set of head gaskets that have been on there, it tears a lot of the gasket away. And so we just razor blade rebuild, scrape all that stuff off, put new head gaskets on, and then if I'm running boost, I put head studs in it too. BTR sells everything. They do sell everything for that upgrade, for that conversion. I'll be curious to see from Brian how many people actually do that. Would it be cheaper to start with LT in the first place? It might be. And the problem guys have with LT is if you're going to run an LT, you have to have, you're going to run obviously very high pressure. You're going to have a factory harness. unless there's some other harness that will run that LT motor. You're going to have you're going to have a drive-by-wire throttle body. You're going to have VVT. So you're going to have some sort of system that will run all of that. Save the LS engines. A W12 LS. Small chamber LS3 heads would be the closest you can get. The closest you can get to what? Just found an old GMC with an 8.1 496. Rest of it worth saving. This thing is a monster. I like that 496. I think that's a good motor. It makes good power. I'm going to move you out of the way because you're freaking the camera out. Problematic green screen. There we go. To 2500 2001 crew cab. How did you modify the stock L86 for port injection? Somebody did that for the guys at Brian Tooley. I forgot who did it. They plastic welded on ports for the injectors. They either drilled and sleeved it or epoxied some stuff in place. Did an oil change on my 3800 about 2.5 quarts came out. Is it still good? Does it still have good oil pressure? Let's see here. Step-by-step LS build. I don't know. Does anybody have a recommendation for a step-by-step on how to build an LS for the first time? I've never done that. GM for life. If that question's for me, I don't have an answer to that. I don't have something that I want to build that is the end all be all thing. I do what I do. I do dyno testing on lots and lots of different things. And so for me, the coolest thing is just whatever the next thing is I get to put up on the dyno. Jonathan, you want to put an LS7 style intake for port injection? You don't need an LS7 intake manifold for that. There are LT intake manifolds that are already have provisions for, as I've shown in this video, there are LT intake manifolds that already have provisions for port injection. So you can plug an L83. You can run. The thing that I don't really like about the L83, but I don't know about the tuning side of it, the piston design is designed for direct injection, and I wonder if it would be susceptible to detonation more so with port injection. I know that it has some fairly sharp edges and stuff, and those are things that I would want to address if I was just going directly to port injection. Miles doesn't imply a problem. No. Say you already had LS parts. Could you swap just the block for the L8T block to take advantage of the stronger block? Basically, the reverse heads. I don't know. I don't know enough about that L8T block to know what swapping all of that stuff on. If you have an iron LS block, unless you're trying to build some sort of pro mod level of power, that block and that crank are not going to be useful until you get way, way up there in power. And I don't know how much stronger that block is. Mopar guy's looking for 1,000 horsepower Magnum. I don't know why that's not possible. The I don't know about the Magnum, but that should be doable. Did you run direct injection? We didn't run direct injection on this hybrid motor. It ran as port injection. The closest you can get to DI heads, what, the LS3 heads? I don't know how that would compare to the direct injection heads. Have you done the hybrid LS3, LS7 head that came out for cheap? I haven't seen that. Any suggestions on where to get decent rockers for my LS3 heads? Yeah, I would just get stock ones. I don't know that you're going to find those in a wrecking yard, though. That's a pretty big score. If you do, you should just get the whole motor if it's there. But you might be able to find used rockers for sale online. Is a billet 88 VS turbo too big for the street on a Cam 5.3? Yeah, you're not going to be happy with that. I mean, you'll be happy once it ultimately comes on, but it's going to be pretty laggy. Dylan, I would put a truck Norris cam in your 5.3 looking for 600 to 800 horsepower with a turbo. How do you feel about the dual planar manifolds for the LS? I think that they're problematic. Not the design, because that you can make power with them and make good average power. But the problem with those is that guys don't want to. I have a sticker or something in here. What guys don't want to do is they don't want to figure out how to run two throttle bodies on there. That becomes problematic. Blue collar. So your 214, 220 cam peaks at 5,300. And the Chupacabra cam peaks at 5,800. The Chupacabra cam peaks at 5,800 on a 6-liter. The tighter LSA would tend to make it want to make power at a lower engine speed, but probably not lower than in those ranges. What are the intake manifolds on both of them? And also, what is the tune like? If this is on a chassis dyno and it's on a street car, does the top end only have 20 degrees of timing in or something? Because that will limit where it wants to make peak power. The L8T block is supposedly good for 2,000 horsepower or more. If you're to use pistons with valve reliefs, could you use off-the-shelf pistons and swap them to match the heads? These cams that we ran in this test were run with stock pistons that had no valve reliefs. They were flat top pistons. So there definitely is valve relief there. I don't know. I'd have to ask Brian what the valve drop is on the L83 heads compared to the LS heads. And then also see where the valve position is. The valves are reversed on the LT head. So if anything, I think that the intake valve relief would be on a different side. So it's probably not going to be a shelf piston unless the reliefs on both sides are enough to get done what you get done. But that would be a good question. I'd have to ask James or Brian about that. Jonathan, what is an 8728 cam? Oh, John, it's an LS3 head with LS7 raised intake port so that you can run LS7. So does it have LS3 rocker positions in it and valve locations on it, but with a raised port on it? And does it flow any better than a? Is there any benefit to that? As we saw, the difference between an LS3 head and an LS7 head, even up to 740 or 50 horsepower, was not dramatically different. I thought you'd go live at 7. Normally I do. This is an extra one. Yeah, blue collar. The thing is going to respond to timing much more at the top than it is at the bottom. And if you limit timing, it will just make the power curve go up and just kind of flatten out. It has to, I mean, we run 29 degrees of total timing to get the thing to make peak power where it's going to make peak power based on the camshaft and the intake manifold and the cylinder head, because we give it the amount of timing that it needs to make how much ever power it can make. If we go from 29 to 20 degrees, we're going to take out a bunch of power, and most of that power is going to come out at the top of the RPM range. Richard, what do you think? An L33 with a 2cc forged LS piston, Pro LS beam rods, ARP rod bolts, ARP main studs, Cam Pro LS 240, 250, high ram. Will it work? I don't know about piston to valve clearance on that. If you've got valve reliefs in it, you'll have to make sure to measure that. Blue collar, I don't think you'll see a big change in where they make peak torque. The cams that we tested when I did that Chupacabra test were they were enough different in their lift especially their duration numbers. The guys think that shifts the torque where the things makes peak torque a lot, but it doesn't. Special agent in the house. L3 rockers flows better at lower lift from their numbers. It's cheap and direct bolt-on will fit a 6-liter bore because of smaller valves. Cheaper than refreshing LS7 heads and some free horsepower. Yeah, if the head works and it's machined properly and has good parts in it, then that seems like it's a good. The only thing I don't like actually is I actually don't like the raised port on it. There aren't as many LS7 intake manifolds available as there are LS3 intake manifolds. And since we can make a huge amount of power, I'd rather just see a small bore, small valve LS3 head. And I actually didn't like on that 4.8, it's we thought it was a good idea at the time, but I actually didn't like the installation of the small dome forged pistons on the 4.8 that I did. I used it extensively time after time after time, but I would much rather have a flat top piston than even a small dome. Richard, I've been very interested in the CTSV blower series you've done. I'm considering it on the 5.3. Do you already have the conversion for that? Because I don't know that company's making those anymore for that blower. And the blower kit would work on the so would a LSA blower or a Magnuson blower or any kind of Roots blower would work fine, or a twin screw. Those will all work fine with that camshaft. So, blue collar. I can answer your question about the smaller heads. Dyno results. Cathedral port. 5.3. Cam test. Stock head test. Okay, here we go. 706. Okay, so on the your comment about the smaller head, smaller valve, smaller port, whatever, making peak power earlier, it doesn't. When I ran the test comparing a 317 head, which made less power than the 706 head on the cammed 5.3, they made peak power or peak torque within 100 RPM of each other, meaning that it was the same. Yeah, I don't think that the company that did the adapters to run that Cadillac blower, I don't know that they're producing that anymore. I don't think that they are. Yeah, they all made peak torque at the same, essentially the same RPM. And I think if I looked at the results of even on that 6-liter, I think we would see the same thing. It takes a dramatic change to change where the thing is making power, because other things are affecting that: the intake manifold, the displacement, magical forces, unseen directional forces. We don't have a poll. We don't have a whole bunch of time left. This time to get a poll, right? Okay, would you swap L83 heads onto your 5.3-liter LS? So this should tell us something. I think even if I went back and looked at some radically different camshafts, that we might even see a similar thing there. Other than running the stock cam versus something else, I don't think we see a big change. Excuse me. Let's see. Let's see. What's our ultimate cam test? I think we saw some pretty big changes from that. We saw some pretty big changes from testing all the stock cams. Okay. Let's take a look. I think even on the stock ones that we saw a pretty big change. Yeah, so like an LS9, for instance, shifted peak power from 52 or 5300 out to 62. So change it by 1,000 RPM. Peak torque changed from 4,300 to 5,000 on an LS9 camshaft. That's pretty big change. And that 224 cam was about the same. 5,000 to 5,100 for the torque peak, and then out at 6,200 for the horsepower peak. Took a pretty big chance. Tom DeMuse is not the guy that did the thing for the Cadillac blower. Tom DeMuse did the adapter for to put the Ford blower on there, to put the Ford GT500 stuff on there, or like the one that I use, which was the Ford Racing one. For that one, I think was for a kit for the for a Coyote, but same blower mounting. How would ported 799 heads fare against stock Gen 5 heads? A properly ported set of 799 heads flow 310 or 320 CFM. Stock Gen 5 L83 heads flow more like 260. So the 799 heads would certainly support more power. What was our poll doing? 50-50. That's actually more than I thought. I thought it would be way skewed on the no side of things. See, that's why we do it. So we live and learn. So we can go to live chat for a little while. See if that changes anything. Porting the stock heads is whether they're you could port the 799 heads, you could port the 706 or 862 heads, and ported versions of either one of those heads are the equivalent of, or nearly the equivalent of, like the aftermarket heads. If you look at the video that I did comparing a lot of cathedral port heads, you can see ported stock heads do very well if they're done properly. The average guy's not going to be able to do that, but guys that have really good programs, we did the stuff with Brian when he was at Total Engine Airflow. And by now, there should be lots of good guys that have good programs for making these things flow really well. And if you look at the flow numbers through the whole lift range, you could see properly ported versions of those heads do very well in comparison to your Trick Flow, Airflow Research, Dart, PRC, or whoever has a dedicated casting to start out with. I think that ultimately the aftermarket stuff should be a little bit better. But again, like we've talked about with all the LS3 and the LS7 stuff, you just having the head be better is not enough. You also have to have a motor that's going to utilize that, like we saw in the little Ford deal. A 165 head is arguably one of the better heads for putting it on a stock 5-liter Ford. But if you just put it on a stock one, it doesn't gain a whole bunch of power because you have other things restricting it. The stock exhaust, if you had the stock exhaust on there, the stock throttle body, stock intake manifold, the stock camshaft. And so you have other things that would be restricting the gains that you might get. And so it's the same thing with ported heads. If you have a head, one that flows 310 and one that flows 320, if you're not utilizing all of the 310, the 320 is going to be of limited value. So we're back up to 53% on our nose. The nose have nose. Camacho, even though I don't know if do you have one of the Cadillac blowers? If you don't, another alternative would be to go to Tom over at DeMuse Engineering, and he has an assembly that you can use, a lower intake manifold and stuff, that you could put one of these Cadillac GT500 blowers on there, which are still available out there. You could still buy those. And hopefully the prices of those have calmed down now that after the video that I did on it, it tends to jack the prices up for all of the people. 50, let's see. Oh, I thought we were up at 56% there for a second, but 53% on the nose. Late arrival here, were those the factory Gen 5 injectors on the test? No, when I ran the comparison of putting the L83 heads on the LS and making the hybrid, it was not run as direct injection. We could not do that, or we did not do that. We ran it as port injection. So those holes in the heads were plugged, And then the intake manifold, the BTR intake manifold, had provisions for injectors already and was run basically as a port injected LS motor. And then on the L86 manifold, that manifold was modified to accept port injection. And again, just run as port injection on both of those, not as a DI motor. Only port injection. So then the comparison now needs to be like we talked about earlier before you got here, the whole L83 version, the L83 motor. The Tom DeMuse manifold and stuff and a drive assembly, because he did the stuff for the blower drive as well. All that worked fairly well. I don't know how much power you could ultimately get out of it. One, because of the blower, and one also, I'd have to ask Tom if they've stepped up to 8-rib stuff to see if that can be, to make sure that you have enough belt wrap and stuff. Because you're always, with any kind of blower, whether it's a centrifugal blower or roots blower, at some point you're going to get into an issue with, when you get down in pulley size and blower speed and airflow and power, you will probably get into a situation that you're dealing with belt slippage. So you need to try to cure that by more belt wrap, more grooves, going from a 6-rib to an 8-rib to a 10-rib belt. You can also do other kinds of pulleys, these sure grip kind of coated pulleys, ones with the dragon teeth in it, which tend to eat belts too. But all of that stuff is necessary to make sure that you don't have belt slippage, because if you're not spinning the blower relative to the motor, then you're not making power. Blue collar, if you run this the way that we ran it, and you ran it with the correct crank sensor, you could run this just as an LS. So that should work fine. I do think that there's power in direct injection over port injection. Brian's done that test, so there's definitely power to be had from that. Does this mean the upcoming Gen 6 small block might have both port and direct injection like the other manufacturers? The GM did that already on the ZR1 motor. They had both. I think that they may have been doing that also to try to clean the valves, to try to keep the backsides of the valves clean, which is definitely an issue with direct injection. Do the Gen 5 generally like a larger duration cam? The test cam was considerably higher than what you'd use on a Gen 4. No, it's actually considerably smaller than we would run on a Gen 4. The Gen 5 stuff, the way that they respond, that was a 230 cam, and you would run something like that or slightly bigger than that on an LS motor. I was going to say, don't use grip tech pulleys. They really dig into belts and eat belts. I don't know about the grip tech stuff. The stuff with the slots that they cut in it tends to hurt belt life. Anything that grabs the belt more tends to reduce belt life. Those things kind of go together. I know a lot of times when we're running blower stuff on the engine dyno and we're getting belt slip, one of the things that we try is we put track bite on the belt and run it. And it does work for a short period of time, but that definitely decreases belt life. No, this cam was a 230 240X. So lots of exhaust duration. But again, LS motors have lots of exhaust duration too, typically when they run at this kind of power level. And the video that I'm doing today is a built up 5.3. stock bottom end kind of thing versus an LS versus a Gen 5 motor, or versus this this hybrid motor, to see how it compares. And it's an interesting comparison. The direct injection stuff is, and especially I want to follow that up later on with the stuff that Brian and James did on the LT1, on the bigger 6.2 stuff, because they made really impressive power with the direct injection and methanol and, you know, ported stock heads and stuff. It's really pretty impressive. And then obviously we'll need to include after that, what if you just did a like we talked about, what if you just did the L83 and had direct injection and had the camshaft and had the compression and had all of the things. I'd like to see if they put the effort into a 5.3 like they did the larger 6.2. I'd like to see where the 5.3 gets to. I think it would be impressive power. You know, relative to the displacement. We all like to see the little one make big power. Just got my 5.7 sloppy stage 2 running, and see tons of information on idle from 16 to 29 degrees. What's the ideal idle and RPM for this to idle at? I don't know if that's a stick or an automatic, but it should easily idle at 800 RPM on the sloppy stage 2 on a 5.7. And I don't know on what guys do on idle timing. We have probably, I don't know, 25 or 30 degrees or something. It doesn't really matter for us for what I'm doing, because I don't go in and do, I don't care about the idle on the engine dyno. So I'm not trying to get it to idle in a car and pull it into gear and then have the AC go on and have the idle come up. I'm not doing any of that work on it. So you really need to talk to a guy who's like a street tuner. Maybe James if James is around, he can answer that. Would you swap L83 heads on your 5.3 liter LS? It's still 50-50. That's interesting. Yeah, Matt over at Sloppy might have a better idea. He does a lot of tuning with the factory ECU, so he could probably tell you a little bit more. Got up at 2:30, drove to Georgia, came back to Central Florida around noon. I'm spent. The rental didn't help. 22 Tacoma, horrible seats. But at least it had AC, right? Is it hot out there in Florida? I'm gonna take a trip out there. Eight to 10 degrees of idle timing? That seems really low. Three weeks of 99 to 100 degrees. Yeah, that's like the rest of the lower portion of the United States. Ronald, that's a big camshaft for a turbo combination. I don't know about those. I'd have to look and see what the maps look like on those precision turbos. But the power output is going to be a direct reflection of whatever the turbos will support. If the guys from Precision tell you that each one of those turbos is capable of supporting 1500 divided by 2, 750 horsepower, then yes. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what you do to the motor. It's going to be, if the turbos are not big enough to support that sort of power level, then it won't happen. Yeah, a lot of times so I don't even. We usually hook up the IAC on the engine dyno. At least I do, just so that it doesn't flip out. But again, I'm not adjusting any of that. I'm not tuning any of it. And I don't see a big change in if we let it, if I'm able to let it sit there and get it to idle and we make a big change in timing, it doesn't seem to affect the idle speed very much. Stage 3 cam brought the rotating sum from. Why is that a big cam? I just think it's more cam than you need to make 1500 horsepower on a 427. You could do it with 10 or 15 degrees less duration on it, and it would probably drive around better. I don't know what you're trying to do. If it's a drag race motor, then it will be fine. You can make the power output that you can make with a motor is just a function of the turbos. As long as you didn't put stock cams in there, like I said, you could put 220 or 230 cams in there, and it would still make that same power. It's just going to do it at a little bit higher boost level. So when I'm helping people select camshafts, normally don't even talk about the peak power. It's all the other things that are important. Drag race street also, okay. C10 pickup. Do you believe you can get a Gen 3 or 4 LS to do the same thing using stock LS heads, using an aftermarket cam and a BTR intake manifold? Well, we're going to see. That's what the video is today. But the answer on stock heads is no. You're not going to get this. You're not going to get it to make anywhere near that kind of power on using stock heads. It will take an aftermarket head, definitely. Cylinder head flow is important, but having the whole combination work together. And as you saw on the video, if you've watched the video, because of the intake manifold, this thing was able to make a pretty high power number, but it did it at a fairly high engine speed too. It was up there. It was definitely up there. So if you like to rev, that's one way to get there. So where are we? I'm going to take a look and see where we were making peak power at. Long runner intake manifold. Keep going. Peak power came at 506, 7325. So that's pretty high. But it was 705 from 7,100 or so to 7,400. So it was, all within what kind of 1 horsepower there. The L83 head was a considerable improvement over the Gen 4 rec port heads. This wasn't a rec port head test. This was a 5.3, so you don't run rec port heads on a 5.3. We ran cathedral port heads on a 5.3. Ronald, you're in Northern California? Whereabouts? Shadow Ops, thanks for the information. Play around with timing. Ronald, that's part of why I don't do tuning is the wide open throttle stuff takes like 5 or 6 pulls, and the drivability, idle, in gear, all of that, cold start, all of that stuff takes forever. How's our poll doing? Still at 51%. So the 51s are higher. I'm going to go ahead and close that out now because it's almost time to go. So I can get back to work on the comparison between, and I have lots of data on there too. So we have the short block, whether the piston head notches, the cylinder heads, whether they were milled, whether they were ported, what the cam was, the lift, duration, lobe separation angle, whether they had VVT, the intake was, the throttle body, headers, fuel, compression, valve angle, valve sizes, what the peak flow was, whether it was port or DI. Lots of good comparison information. The L83 head does not flow more than an LS3 head. So if you were going to compare an LT head to an LS3 head, you'd compare the LT1 or the L86 heads because those flow more than the L83 heads. Those have different valve sizes and stuff. I have a Gen 3 6-liter. I'm going to be investing in 4 draws and pistons. Should I bite the bullet and go with the stroker kit? You will make more power, and with a bigger motor, you will be able to make more power at a lower engine speed. And in my opinion, RPM is directly RPM and reliability are directly related. Ronald, no, I live in Northern California. I travel to Southern California to go do all the testing or do a lot of the testing at West Tech. Struner, what's up? Miss the live stream. I have to rewatch. It's good stuff too. It's port injection and direct injection and all the kinds of different kinds of injection. 5.3 versus 5.3. 5.3 on 5.3 action. That's why people come here. 2 more minutes. Actually, like a minute and a half, minute 30. One, 1.5 minutes. Yeah, we did, Michael. We did the hybrid one, the LS with the LT heads on it. Close to Redding. No, I've been up there though before, Redding and Red Bluff and all up in that area. Pretty hot up there right now, I bet. I'm down below Sacramento. Ronald, thanks. I appreciate it. I don't know what I would need right now. I got lots of LS stuff. Most of the other motors that I want to run right now are not LS. Thor, what's up? So you can go to sleep now? Good. Yeah, if it's going in a rock crawler, a stroker would carter would be a good idea. You can have much more power and torque in the RPM range that you'd be using it on rock crawler stuff. Wild Engineering, what's up? I try to do weekend streams. Normally do them at night, but I hadn't been on the last 2 nights, so I wanted to jump on in the morning and say what's up to everybody. But I got to get back to work. Got to do the other video. Work. There's no rest for the wicked. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I might be back tonight at 7. We'll have to see how quickly this video gets done. I want to make sure that I do a good job on providing all the information on the LS versus the LS LT hybrid. So I got to get to work on that. I'll see you guys all later.